Captain Blackwood had terrorized these waters for 20 years, his ship cutting through the Caribbean like death itself. But today, something was different. A lone dolphin swam alongside his vessel, its movements deliberate and urgent, as if trying to communicate something beyond human understanding. The creature's eyes held an intelligence that made even his hardened crew fall silent. It circled back repeatedly, clicking and whistling in patterns that seemed almost like language. When the dolphin began swimming toward a hidden cove, something deep inside the captain's weathered soul stirred. Against all logic, against his reputation as the most feared pirate in the Caribbean, he gave the order to follow. What he found in that secluded inlet would change not just his life, but the very legend that sailors whispered about in taverns across the seven seas. But what could possibly transform a man who had shown no mercy for 2 decades? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brass spyglass trembled slightly in Captain Blackwood's weathered hands as he lowered it from his eye. For 20 years, this instrument had surveyed countless horizons, searching for merchant vessels heavy with treasure or naval ships foolish enough to challenge his supremacy. The lens had witnessed the last moments of terror in his victim's eyes, had focused on the white flags of surrender that meant another fortune claimed. Today it had shown him something entirely different, a creature that seemed to be trying to speak. "Captain," his first mate Willem called from the quarterdeck, his Dutch accent thick with concern. "The men are getting restless. That beast's been circling us for near an hour now." Blackwood's reputation had been carved from blood and fire across the Caribbean waters. 3 months ago, he had taken the Spanish galleon Santa Isabella, leaving no survivors to tell tales of his mercy, because there had been none to tell. The ship's hold had yielded enough gold to make his crew wealthy men, yet they remained with him not for the promise of future riches, but for the certainty that crossing Captain Blackwood meant a swift journey to the ocean floor. His ship, the Crimson Revenge, bore the scars of 100 battles. Her black hull had been painted with the blood of her enemies, or so the legends claimed. The skull and crossbones that flew from her mainmast struck fear into the hearts of sailors from Port Royal to Cartagena. Even the British Navy had learned to give his vessel a wide berth, unless they sailed in formation with overwhelming numbers. The crew that served under Blackwood were not ordinary seamen. Each man had been hand-picked for his ruthlessness, his ability to follow orders without question, and his complete absence of conscience when it came to taking what they wanted. Miguel, the ship's gunner, had once leveled an entire coastal village that refused to pay tribute. Thomas, the bosun, could gut a man faster than most could draw their blade. These were not men who questioned their captain's decisions, yet something about the Dolphin's presence had unsettled them all. Blackwood himself had risen to command through a combination of tactical brilliance and utter brutality. He had killed his first man at 16, taken his first ship at 22, and by 30 had established himself as the most feared pirate captain in the western seas. His personal cutlass, stained with the blood of countless enemies, bore notches marking his most significant victories. 47 marks adorned the blade's spine, each representing a ship captain who had fallen to his superior skill and merciless nature. Yet beneath the fearsome exterior, something had been growing cold within him. The gold felt heavier each year, the victories more hollow. He had everything a pirate could desire: wealth beyond measure, a crew that obeyed his every command, and a reputation that made grown men weep at the mention of his name. But in the quiet moments between raids, when the ship rocked gently on calm seas and his men slept below deck, an emptiness gnawed at him that no amount of treasure could fill. The Dolphin circled again, this time closer to the port sides, its sleek grey body cut through the water with impossible grace, and when it surfaced, those intelligent dark eyes seemed to look directly at him. Not at the ship, not at the crew, but at him specifically. The creature's clicks and whistles created a pattern that almost sounded like languid, like it was trying to tell him something urgent, important. "Shall we drive it off, Captain?" Willem asked, fingering the pistol at his belt. "Some of the men think it's an ill omen." Blackwood studied the creature through his spyglass once more. In all his years at sea, he had encountered dolphins before, but never one that behaved like this. They were usually playful creatures that rode the bow waves for sport before disappearing into the depths. This one showed purpose, intention, as if it had sought them out specifically. The rational part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive through 2 decades of violence and betrayal, told him to ignore the animal and continue on their planned course toward the merchant shipping lanes near Jamaica. Pirates who followed omens and superstitions usually ended up decorating the gallows in Port Royal, but something deeper, something he had thought long dead, stirred within his chest as he watched the dolphin's persistent efforts to gain his attention. The dolphin's behavior defied everything Blackwood knew about sea creatures. It swam in deliberate figure eights around the ship, surfacing at precise intervals to emit a series of clicks that seemed almost conversational. Each time it appeared, those dark, intelligent eyes sought his own, as if checking to ensure he was paying attention to its maritime performance. "Look at that, would you?" muttered old Pete, the ship's cook, leaning against the rail with a wooden ladle still clutched in his gnarled hand. 30 years I've been sailing these waters, and I ain't never seen the like." The crew had gradually assembled on deck, drawn by the unusual spectacle. These hardened men, who had faced down naval cannons and cutlass-wielding enemies without flinching, stood transfixed by a single dolphin's strange dance. Superstition ran deep in sailors' blood, and the creature's persistent attention felt like something more than mere animal curiosity. "It's trying to lead us somewhere," whispered young Tommy, the newest member of the crew. At barely 18, he had joined them after his merchant vessel was captured near Tortuga. Rather than kill the boy, Blackwood had offered him a choice: join or swim. Tommy had chosen wisely and proven himself capable, though he retained an innocence that the older pirates found both amusing and irritating. Willem spat over the side, his weathered face creased with worry. "Dolphins ain't natural when they act like this. My grandmother back in Amsterdam, she told stories of sea spirits that took animal form to lure ships into danger. The first mate's concerns were not without merit. Pirates lived by reading signs and trusting instincts, but they also survived by recognizing traps. The Caribbean waters held countless hidden reefs, unmarked shoals, and secluded coves where enemies might wait in ambush. Following a wild animal's guidance seemed the height of foolishness. Yet Blackwood found himself studying his ancient maritime charts, spread across the navigation table in his cabin. These weathered documents, accumulated over decades of raiding, showed every known hazard and safe harbor in their usual hunting grounds. The area where the dolphin seemed intent on leading them appeared as mostly blank water, marked only with the notation "unexplored inlet" in his own careful handwriting from years past. The creature's persistence amazed him. Most dolphins would have lost interest and moved on to hunt fish or play with their pods. This one remained focused solely on the ship, occasionally swimming ahead in the direction it wanted them to follow, then returning to check their response. Its intelligence seemed almost human in its complexity. "Captain," called Miguel from the crow's nest, his Spanish accent carrying clearly in the still air. "The beast, she is heading toward the reef line. There be shallow water ahead if we follow." Blackwood raised his spyglass again, studying the dolphin's path. The creature was indeed swimming toward a section of coast he had always avoided, where jutting rocks and unpredictable currents made navigation treacherous. Ships that ventured too close to those waters often found themselves impaled on hidden coral or trapped in narrow channels with no room to maneuver. The logical choice was clear: ignore the animal and continue toward their planned hunting grounds, where Spanish treasure ships followed predictable routes. By evening they could be engaging a fat galleon laden with silver from the New World mines. The crew expected profitable action, not wildlife watching expeditions that led them away from proven hunting waters. But something about the dolphin's urgency spoke to a part of Blackwood's soul he had thought permanently silent. The creature's behavior suggested desperation, as if time was running short for whatever message it was trying to convey. Its repeated returns to check their position felt almost pleading, like a child trying to get an adult's attention for something important. "Begging your pardon, Captain," said Willem carefully, "but the men are wondering about our course. We've been drifting here near an hour now. There's good hunting to be had in the shipping lanes." Blackwood folded his charts with deliberate slowness, his mind weighing options that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. His reputation had been built on decisive action and unwavering commitment to profitable violence. Captains who showed uncertainty or followed whims instead of logic rarely kept their crew's loyalty for long. The Dolphin surfaced once more, this time close enough that he could see the individual scars on its hide, evidence of a life lived in dangerous waters. It hung motionless for a moment, as if waiting for his decision, then began swimming slowly toward the distant coastline. "Hard to starboard," Blackwood commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority that had kept mutinies at bay for 2 decades. "Follow the beast." Willem's eyes widened, but he relayed the order without question. The crew exchanged glances as they adjusted the sails, their movements precise despite their obvious confusion. Whatever doubts they harbored about their captain's decision, none dared voice them aloud. The Crimson Revenge turned toward the mysterious coastline, her hull cutting through increasingly shallow waters. The Dolphin seemed to sense their compliance and began swimming with renewed purpose, occasionally leaping from the water in what appeared to be expressions of approval or encouragement. As they drew closer to the reef line, the water changed color from deep blue to a lighter turquoise that spoke of dangerous shallows beneath. Blackwood positioned himself at the bow, his experienced eye reading the subtle signs that meant the difference between safe passage and shipwreck. Foam patterns revealed hidden rocks, while the spacing of swells indicated changing depths. "Drop anchor and lower the boats," he ordered, as they reached water too shallow for the ship to safely navigate. "I'll take a small crew to follow our guide." The Dolphin had paused near what appeared to be a narrow channel between towering rock formations. From the ship's deck, the opening looked barely wide enough for a longboat, let alone a vessel of their size. Yet the creature waited there patiently, as if this had been its destination all along. Willem selected 4 of their most trusted men to accompany the captain. They lowered a boat and rowed toward the channel, following the Dolphin's sleek form as it navigated between jagged coral formations that could tear a hull to splinters. The water here was crystal clear, revealing a sandy bottom perhaps 15 feet below, but also showing the sharp teeth of submerged rocks that explained why this area appeared unmarked on most charts. The channel twisted and turned, requiring careful navigation to avoid scraping against the rocky walls that rose on either side. In some places the passage narrowed so dramatically that their oars nearly touched stone. The Dolphin moved ahead with confident grace, clearly familiar with every twist and hazard along the route. As they rounded a sharp bend, the channel suddenly opened into a hidden cove, unlike anything Blackwood had ever seen. The water here was mirror calm, protected by high walls of weathered limestone that created a natural harbor completely invisible from the open sea. Ancient caves dotted the cliff faces, and a small beach of white sand curved along the far shore. But it was the debris floating near the beach that caught his attention. Splintered wood, torn canvas, and the unmistakable remnants of a ship's rigging drifted in the gentle current. A broken driftwood cross bobbed among the wreckage, its simple construction suggesting desperate hands had lashed it together with whatever materials they could find. "Recent wreck," observed Willem grimly, pointing to a piece of sail canvas that still showed bright colors despite its torn condition. "Days, not weeks." The Dolphin swam directly toward the beach, its behavior becoming even more urgent as it approached the shore. It began clicking rapidly, the sounds echoing off the cave walls and creating an almost musical resonance. The creature's distress was palpable, as if time was running critically short. Blackwood studied the rocky shoreline through his spyglass. searching for whatever had drawn the Dolphin to this hidden sanctuary. The beach appeared empty except for more wreckage, but something about the way shadows fell among the boulders suggested there might be more to discover. "There," whispered young Tommy, pointing toward a cluster of large rocks near the high tide line. "I saw movement, something pale." The captain adjusted his spyglass and focused on the indicated area. At first, he saw only stone and shadow, but then a slight motion caught his eye. Something small and light-colored shifted among the rocks, barely visible against the weathered limestone. The Dolphin had reached the shallows now and was swimming back and forth in an agitated pattern, its clicks becoming more frequent and desperate. Whatever had brought them to this isolated cove was somewhere among those rocks, hidden from casual observation, but clearly visible to the creature's more sensitive perception. "Row for shore," Blackwood commanded quietly, "and keep your weapons ready. We don't know what we're walking into." As their boat scraped against the sandy bottom, the Dolphin's behavior reached a crescendo of urgency, as if their arrival had triggered some critical countdown that could not be delayed any longer. The first thing Blackwood noticed was the smell. Not the expected scent of death and decay that shipwrecks usually carried, but something else entirely. The sour odor of sickness and human suffering mixed with salt air and rotting seaweed. His boots crunched on broken shells as he waded through the shallows, his hand instinctively resting on his cutlass hilt. "Sweet Mary, Mother of God." Willem breathed behind him, crossing himself in the old Catholic manner his Dutch upbringing had never quite erased. Among the weathered boulders that lined the high tide mark, two small figures huddled together like broken dolls discarded by some careless child. They were girls, no more than 8 or 10 years old, their once fine clothing reduced to salt-stained rags that clung to their skeletal frames. Their skin was burned raw by the merciless Caribbean sun, lips cracked and bleeding from dehydration. The elder girl, perhaps 10, had wrapped her thin arms around her smaller companion in a protective embrace that spoke of days spent shielding each other from the elements. A tattered blue silk ribbon still clung to her matted brown hair, the only remaining hint of the privileged life they had once known. Her eyes, huge in her gaunt face, watched the approaching pirates with the awareness of prey animals that had learned to expect only predators. The younger child, barely conscious, stirred weakly as shadows fell across their makeshift shelter. Someone had arranged pieces of driftwood and torn canvas to create a pitiful windbreak, evidence of desperate attempts to survive in this isolated place. Empty coconut shells and broken pottery suggested they had tried to collect rainwater, though the recent dry spell had left them with nothing but hope and prayers. "Papa," the smaller girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is Papa coming?" The elder child's face crumpled with renewed grief, but she managed to find strength enough to stroke her companion's fevered brow. "Shh, Sarah, rest now." Blackwood felt something crack inside his chest, a sensation he had not experienced since childhood. These were not the hardened merchant sailors or naval officers he was accustomed to defeating in battle. They were innocents, children who had done nothing to deserve the fate that had befallen them. The sight of their suffering struck him with an impact more devastating than any cannonball. "How long have they been here?" he asked quietly, kneeling beside the improvised shelter. The older girl flinched at his approach, but desperation overcame fear. 3 days, she managed to croak. Maybe 4. Hard to remember. Willem examined the wreckage scattered around their position, his experienced eye reading the story written in broken wood and torn rigging. "Merchant vessel," he reported grimly. "Probably bound for Jamaica from the looks of the cargo remains. Hit the reef in the storm that passed through last week." The Dolphin had followed them into the shallows and now swam in agitated circles just offshore, its clicking growing more urgent, as if it understood the critical nature of the situation. The creature's behavior suddenly made perfect sense. It had been trying to bring help to these dying children, somehow recognizing that humans might be able to save what it could not. "Water," the elder girl whispered, the single word containing all the desperate hope her young body could muster. Blackwood found himself moving without conscious thought. He unslung the water flask from his belt and knelt beside the children, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he lifted the older girl's head. Easy now, just small sips. The cool water seemed to revive her slightly, enough for her to help support her companion as Blackwood offered the flask to the younger child. Sarah's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing the deep blue of tropical shallows, before closing again as she managed to swallow a few precious drops. "What are your names?" Blackwood asked softly. "I'm Emma," the older girl replied, her voice gaining strength with each sip of water. "This is my sister Sarah. Our parents—" Her voice broke, unable to finish the sentence that would make their loss real. The captain's crew stood in stunned silence behind him, witnessing a transformation they would never have believed possible. This was the man who had shown no mercy to grown sailors begging for their lives, yet here he knelt in wet sand, offering water to dying children with the tenderness of a father caring for his own daughters. "You're safe now," Blackwood heard himself say, the words foreign on his tongue. "We're going to take care of you." Blackwood shrugged off his heavy wool coat, the same garment that had protected him through countless battles and storms. The dark fabric, worn soft by years of sea spray and violence, had been a symbol of his authority and power. Now it became something entirely different as he wrapped it around the shivering girls, transforming from armor into shelter. "Tommy, bring the medical kit from the boat," he commanded, his voice carrying new urgency. "Willem, we need fresh water and whatever food we have that won't be too harsh for their stomachs." The younger pirate scrambled to obey, his usual clumsiness replaced by careful efficiency born of witnessing something profound. The other crew members moved with similar purpose, their hardened faces reflecting emotions they had thought long buried. Even Miguel, who had never shown mercy to enemy wounded, found himself gathering smooth stones to create a makeshift stretcher. Emma tried to sit up straighter as the pirates worked around them, her natural dignity asserting itself despite their desperate circumstances.
"You're pirates," she observed, her young voice matter-of-fact,
rather than accusatory. "I can tell by your clothes and the way you move." Blackwood paused in his ministrations, meeting her direct gaze. Most adults cowered when they recognized what he was, yet this child regarded him with curious assessment rather than terror. "Aye, we are. Does that frighten you?" "It should," Emma replied thoughtfully. "But you gave us water. Pirates in the stories never give water to anyone." The captain found himself oddly moved by her simple logic. Stories painted pirates as monsters who showed no mercy, and in his case, those stories had been largely accurate. Yet here he knelt in wet sand, offering comfort to two defenseless children, and it felt more natural than 20 years of calculated cruelty. Sarah stirred in his arms, her fevered eyes focusing on his weathered face. "Are you an angel?" she whispered, her child's voice carrying the innocent faith that only the very young possessed. Willem nearly choked on his own spit at the suggestion, while the other pirates exchanged glances that mixed amazement with something approaching reverence. If Captain Blackwood could be mistaken for an angel, perhaps redemption was possible for any soul, no matter how stained with sin. "No, little one," Blackwood replied gently, surprised by the tenderness in his own voice, "just a sailor who happened to be in the right place." He lifted Sarah carefully, her small body weighing no more than a child's doll in his powerful arms. The trust she showed, relaxing against his chest without fear, struck him with force that left him momentarily breathless. When had anyone last trusted him so completely? When had he last deserved such trust? Emma proved able to walk with assistance, though her legs shook with exhaustion and malnutrition. Tommy supported her other side as they made their way across the rocky beach toward the waiting longboat. Each step seemed to cost her tremendous effort, but she maintained her determined silence, refusing to slow their progress with complaints. The Dolphin continued its agitated swimming pattern as they loaded the girls into the boat, its clicks and whistles creating a maritime chorus that somehow seemed approving. The creature had accomplished its mission, bringing human help to the stranded children. But it remained nearby as if wanting to ensure their safety until they reached the ship. "Easy does it," Blackwood murmured, as they settled the girls in the boat's bottom, arranging his coat and additional canvas to provide cushioning against the wooden hull. Sarah had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. Emma watched everything with alert interest, despite her obvious exhaustion. The journey back through the narrow channel required careful navigation, but this time Blackwood's attention was divided between reading the water and monitoring his unexpected passengers. Every small sound from the girls caused him to glance down, checking for signs of distress or pain. His crew noticed this new protectiveness and adjusted their own behavior accordingly, speaking in hushed tones and moving with unusual care to avoid jostling the boat. As they emerged from the channel into deeper water, the Crimson Revenge came into view, her black hull and skull-adorned flag, presenting a stark contrast to the mercy mission they were completing. The ship that had carried death across the Caribbean was about to become a sanctuary for innocence, though how his crew would react to this transformation remained to be seen. "Signal the ship," Blackwood ordered. "Tell them to prepare my cabin for guests and have old Pete warm some broth. Nothing too rich, mind you. Their stomachs need gentle treatment." Willem nodded and began semaphore signals to the ship, his flags conveying instructions that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. The crew watching from the deck would soon learn that their captain had not captured prisoners or treasure, but had instead become protector to 2 dying children. The captain's cabin had never housed anything more precious than stolen gold or captured maps marking hidden treasure. Now it became a makeshift infirmary as Blackwood cleared his personal effects from the great bed, replacing charts of plunder routes with soft blankets hastily gathered from the crew's quarters. Old Pete arrived with his medical kit, a leather satchel containing the basic supplies that kept pirates functional during long voyages. Needle and thread for closing wounds, laudanum for pain, strips of clean cloth for bandaging, and a collection of herbs whose properties he had learned through necessity rather than formal training. The kit had saved more lives than it had failed to preserve, though it had never been used to treat children. "Lord preserve us," Pete muttered, as he examined the girls, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle as he checked their pulse and breathing. "They're more ghost than flesh at this point. Another day in that sun would have finished them." Sarah remained unconscious as they settled her into the bed, her small body barely making an impression in the thick mattress. Emma, though weak, watched everything with alert curiosity, her young mind trying to process the strange reversal of fortune that had brought them aboard a pirate ship as honored guests, rather than prisoners. The crew gathered outside the cabin door, their usual boisterous voices replaced by hushed whispers as word spread throughout the ship. These men had followed Blackwood through countless battles, had seen him show mercy to enemies only when it served strategic purposes. The sight of their captain personally tending to sick children challenged everything they thought they knew about leadership and strength. "Bring water," Blackwood ordered quietly. "Fresh water, not the brackish stuff we use for washing. And see if there's any fruit left in the store. Their bodies need gentle nourishment." Willem hesitated at the cabin door, his weathered face creased with concern that had nothing to do with the girl's condition. "Captain, the men are talking. They're wondering what this means for our arrangement." The first mate's carefully chosen words carried deeper implications. A pirate crew expected profitable action, shared danger, and clear leadership focused on their collective benefit. Caring for sick children represented a fundamental shift in priorities that could threaten the delicate balance of loyalty and fear that kept mutinies at bay. "Let them talk," Blackwood replied, adjusting the blankets around Sarah's still form. "But make it clear that anyone who threatens these children will answer to me personally." The threat carried absolute conviction, and Willem recognized the dangerous edge in his captain's voice. Whatever transformation was occurring, it had not made Blackwood weak or indecisive. If anything, his protective instincts seemed to be sharpening his already formidable resolve. Emma accepted small sips of water with grateful determination, her parched lips slowly regaining color as hydration began its healing work. "Thank you," she whispered, the simple courtesy carrying weight that elaborate speeches could not match. "Mama always said to mind our manners, even when things seemed hopeless." The mention of her mother brought fresh tears to her eyes, grief mixing with relief in the complex emotional landscape of a child who had survived what no child should endure. Blackwood found himself reaching out instinctively to comfort her, his calloused hand resting gently on her small shoulder. Your parents? He asked carefully. What happened to them? Emma's composure cracked slightly before reasserting itself with admirable strength. The ship broke apart in the storm. Papa put us in a boat. But the waves, she couldn't finish the sentence, but her meaning was clear enough. The cabin fell silent except for the gentle creaking of the ship's timbers and Sarah's shallow breathing. The story was familiar to anyone who had spent years at sea. Good people dying because storms cared nothing for virtue or innocence, children left alone because nature respected no bonds of love or protection. They saved you, Blackwood said quietly. Your parents made sure you survived, even when they couldn't. Old Pete worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the girls' wounds and applying salve to their sun-damaged skin. His movements were careful and methodical, the same precision he brought to treating battle injuries, now serving a completely different purpose. The other crew members who had crowded into the doorway watched in fascination as their ship's rough surgeon became a gentle healer. Will they live? Tommy asked from the doorway, his young voice carrying genuine concern. Pete nodded slowly, his assessment cautiously optimistic. If we can get proper food and water into them, keep them cool and comfortable, I believe so. They're stronger than they look, these two. Survivors through and through. The word survivors resonated through the cabin with particular meaning for men who had made survival their primary occupation through violence and cunning. By evening, Sarah had awakened enough to speak in whispered fragments, her fever breaking as old Pete's careful ministrations took effect. Emma sat beside her sister, holding her hand with the fierce protectiveness of someone who had already lost too much. Between them lay a small, waterlogged object that Emma had clutched throughout their ordeal. A miniature family portrait painted on ivory, its delicate surface damaged, but still recognizable. Tell me about this, Blackwood said gently, noting how Emma's fingers traced the painted faces with reverent care. Papa commissioned it last Christmas, Emma explained, her voice growing stronger with each hour of recovery. He said it was important for families to remember each other, especially when they traveled. Mama laughed and said he was being sentimental, but she posed for hours until the artist got her smile just right. The portrait showed a prosperous merchant family, a distinguished gentleman with kind eyes, a beautiful woman whose smile radiated warmth, and two young girls in their finest dresses. The paint had run slightly from seawater exposure, blurring the edges, but not the essential humanity captured in those faces. Papa was taking us to visit Mama's sister in Jamaica, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. He said the sea voyage would be an adventure, better than staying in stuffy Port Royal all summer. Willem, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped forward with uncharacteristic hesitation. Your father, what was his name? Might be we knew his ship in passing. Jonathan Whitmore, Emma replied with obvious pride. He owned the merchant vessel Isabella's Dream, named for Mama. Papa said she was the finest ship to sail between Port Royal and Kingston, fast enough to outrun pirates, but strong enough to weather any storm. The name struck Blackwood like a physical blow. He knew the Isabella's Dream by reputation, an honest merchant vessel that had never engaged in slave trading or other unsavory practices, captain known for fair dealing and generous treatment of his crew. In the complex ecosystem of Caribbean commerce, Jonathan Whitmore had been one of the rare merchants who earned respect rather than merely fear or hatred. The storm that took them, Willem said carefully, it was a fierce one, caught several ships unprepared. We rode it out in deep water but vessels closer to shore. He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. Sarah's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she managed to continue her story. The waves got so big they came over the deck. Papa put us in the small boat with some water and food, told us to stay together no matter what happened. He said Mama was watching from heaven and would keep us safe. The simple faith in her words carried weight that philosophical treatises could not match. Here was a child who had watched her parents die, had spent days dying herself on a rocky shore, yet still believed in protection and love beyond the grave. Her trust in ultimate goodness stood in stark contrast to the cynicism that had shaped Blackwood's worldview for decades. They did keep you safe, Blackwood found himself saying. They brought you to us. Emma looked up at him with eyes that seemed far older than her 10 years. Are you going to keep us, or will you leave us somewhere when you get tired of taking care of us? The question hung in the air like a challenge, cutting straight through to the heart of every uncertainty that had plagued Blackwood since the moment he decided to follow the Dolphin. Children needed more than temporary rescue. They required commitment, stability, and the kind of consistent care that a pirate's life seemed designed to prevent. We'll figure something out, he replied, the words sounding inadequate even to himself. But Emma seemed satisfied with his honest uncertainty, nodding as if she recognized the complexity of their situation. Papa always said that good people find ways to do good things, even when it seems impossible. Old Pete emerged from checking his supplies, his gruff expression thoughtful. They'll need proper food soon. Ship's biscuits and salt pork won't serve for children recovering from what they've been through. Fresh meat, vegetables, maybe some proper milk if we can manage it. The practical requirements of caring for the girls were beginning to dawn on the crew. Pirates lived on preserved foods and whatever fresh provisions they could steal or purchase during brief port visits. Maintaining the health of growing children would require resources and planning that went far beyond their usual concerns. There's a neutral port 3 days' sail from here, Willem suggested quietly. Dutch settlement, friendly to all flags, as long as there's no trouble. We could resupply properly there. Blackwood nodded, already planning the logistics of caring for his unexpected charges, while maintaining the crew's respect and the ship's operational capabilities. The crew gathered on deck that night under a canopy of stars, their voices carrying the low rumble of men wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. The traditional hierarchy of a pirate ship depended on shared understanding of goals and methods, but caring for orphaned children fell outside every precedent they knew. It ain't natural, grumbled Silas, the ship's carpenter, his weathered hands working a piece of rope into intricate knots. Pirates don't raise babies. We take what we want and leave the rest for others to worry about. But even as he spoke, his fingers were crafting something delicate and purposeful, a small rope doll with carefully braided hair, the kind of toy a skilled sailor might make for his own daughter during long voyages. The contradiction between his words and actions was not lost on the men watching. Miguel leaned against the mainmast, his Spanish accent thick with uncertainty. The captain, he has always been hard but fair. If he says we protect these little ones, then we protect them. But what does this mean for our future? Do we become merchants now? Fishermen? The question struck at the heart of their collective identity. These men had chosen piracy not just for the promise of wealth, but for the freedom it represented. Freedom from social conventions, from others' rules, from the grinding poverty that defined most sailors' lives. Caring for children implied responsibilities that could limit that precious liberty. Willem stood near the ship's wheel, his role as first mate making him the natural spokesman for the crew's concerns. In his hands he held a leather-bound book that few among them could read, but all recognized, the pirate code that governed their shared life. The rules within had been written by practical men facing practical problems, but they offered no guidance for their current situation. The code says nothing about passengers, Willem observed, his Dutch accent making the words sound particularly formal. Says nothing about children or charity or any of this business. We're sailing in uncharted waters, lads, and that's the truth of it. Young Tommy, still new enough to remember life outside piracy, spoke up with the hesitancy of someone testing dangerous ground. My mother always said that protecting the innocent was what separated men from beasts. Maybe that applies to pirates too. Several of the older crew members snorted at this sentiment, but none challenged it directly. They had all been young once, had all carried memories of mothers and sisters and sweethearts who might have expressed similar belief. Piracy had required them to bury such sentiments, but perhaps burial was not the same as death. Protection is one thing, said Black Jack, the bosun whose missing eye gave him a perpetually menacing expression. But what happens when the Royal Navy comes calling, when we need to fight or run fast? Children slow everything down, make us vulnerable. The practical concerns he raised were undeniably valid. Naval vessels had been increasing their patrols in recent months, and surviving such encounters often required swift action and the ability to abandon anything that hindered escape. Children could not be expected to handle the violence and chaos of naval combat. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing," old Pete said quietly, from his position near the galley. "Maybe being forced to think before we act, to consider consequences beyond our own skins, might make us better at staying alive." His words carried special weight because Pete had sailed with 3 different captains before Blackwood, had seen crews destroyed by recklessness and poor judgment. His suggestion that children might actually improve their decision-making process was not mere sentiment, but practical observation from a man who had survived by being practical. The Dolphin that had guided them to the children continued to follow the ship, occasionally visible in the moonlight as it surfaced near their bow. Its presence had become a source of comfort to some crew members and continued unease to others. Sea creatures that altered their natural behavior to interact with humans were traditionally viewed as omens, though whether good or ill remained unclear. "Look at it this way," said Tommy, growing bolder as the discussion continued. "We've spent years taking things from people. Maybe it's time we tried giving something back. Might change our luck for the better." The suggestion that their transformation might bring positive fortune rather than disaster offered a new perspective on their situation. Pirates were deeply superstitious, always looking for signs and portents that might predict their fate. Perhaps caring for innocents could serve as a form of protection against the accumulated bad karma of their violent profession. Willem closed the codebook with deliberate ceremony. "The captain has made his decision, and that settles the matter of what we do. But each man here needs to decide for himself whether he can live with the consequences." 3 days of careful nursing had transformed the dying waifs into recognizable children. Sarah's fever had broken completely, and though she remained weak, her natural curiosity had begun to reassert itself. Emma, stronger from the beginning, had started exploring the ship with the fearless enthusiasm that only children possessed, treating the Crimson Revenge as an enormous floating house full of fascinating secrets. Blackwood found himself establishing new routines around their care. Morning checks on their health, ensuring they ate the gentle foods old Pete prepared specifically for them. Reading aloud from the few books in his personal collection that might interest young minds. The activities felt foreign yet natural, like recovering a language he had once known but forgotten. "Tell us about the ocean," Sarah requested during one of these reading sessions, her small voice gaining strength each day. She had taken to sitting beside him during meals, her trust complete and unquestioning in the way that only children could manage. "What would you like to know?" Blackwood asked, setting aside the maritime history he had been reading. "Everything," Emma declared from her perch near the cabin windows, where she spent hours watching the endless water. "Why is it so big? Where does it end? Are there really sea monsters, like in the story?" Her questions awakened memories of his own childhood fascination with the sea, before violence and greed had colored his relationship with the waters that had become his home. Explaining the ocean to children required him to see it through innocent eyes once again, to remember wonder instead of merely calculating profit and danger. "The ocean is like a great living thing," he began, surprising himself with the poetic nature of his description. "It breathes with the tides, dreams with the currents, and speaks in the language of waves and wind." The girls listened with rapt attention as he described coral reefs like underwater gardens, schools of fish that moved like silver clouds, and whales whose songs could travel across entire oceans. He found himself sharing knowledge accumulated over decades of seafaring, but framing it in terms of beauty and mystery rather than navigation and predation. Silas appeared at the cabin door, his carpenter's hands holding something carefully concealed. "Begging your pardon, Captain, but I finished something for the young ladies." He produced 2 small wooden dolls carved with surprising skill from pieces of driftwood they had collected from the cove. Each figure had been carefully shaped and sanded smooth, with faces that suggested kindness and strength. Simple rope hair had been braided and attached, and tiny pieces of spare sailcloth had been fashioned into miniature dresses. "They're beautiful," Emma breathed, accepting her doll with the reverence usually reserved for precious treasures. "Look, Sarah, they have faces just like real people." Sarah clutched her doll to her chest, her eyes bright with the first genuine joy they had seen since her rescue. "What are their names?" "That's for you to decide," Silas replied gruffly, clearly pleased by their reaction, but trying to maintain his reputation for toughness. "Figured every little girl should have something to hold on to." The gesture represented more than simple kindness. These hardened men, who had spent years taking what they wanted without regard for others' feelings, were learning to give freely. The dolls required hours of careful work with no expectation of payment or recognition, purely for the pleasure of bringing happiness to children who had lost everything. Old Pete arrived with the girls' afternoon meal, fresh fish prepared with herbs that aided digestion, along with fruit purchased during their brief stop at the Dutch settlement. His attention to their nutritional needs had become a source of pride, evidence that his medical skills extended beyond treating battle wounds. "You're getting your color back," he observed with satisfaction, noting the healthy pink returning to Sarah's cheeks. "Another week of good food and rest, and you'll be strong enough to climb the rigging." "Can we really?" Emma asked excitedly. "Can we learn to sail like the crew?" Blackwood considered the question seriously. Traditional ship's boys learn seamanship through direct participation in daily operations, and the girls had demonstrated both intelligence and courage. Teaching them practical skills might serve multiple purposes, keeping them occupied, building their confidence, and ensuring they could contribute to the ship's welfare. "We'll start with simple knots," he decided. "Every sailor needs to understand rope work." Willem appeared with a selection of different rope weights and materials, his expression showing grudging admiration for the captain's decision. "Might as well learn proper techniques from the beginning. Bad habits are harder to tote than good ones are to build." The afternoon lesson that followed proved both educational and entertaining, with Emma and Sarah competing good-naturedly to master each new knot pattern. The first sign of trouble appeared as a distant speck on the horizon, visible only through Blackwood's spyglass, as the sun reached its zenith. The approaching vessel flew British colors and moved with the purposeful speed of a naval warship actively hunting pirates, rather than merely patrolling trade routes. "HMS Retribution," Willem identified grimly, lowering his own telescope. "Captain Morrison commanding. They've been tracking us for 3 weeks, ever since that business with the Spanish merchant near Tortuga." Blackwood felt his stomach tighten with a familiar combination of anticipation and dread. Naval pursuits were nothing new, but this time he carried passengers who could not defend themselves, children whose safety had become more important than his own survival. The transformation of his priorities created tactical complications he had never faced before. "How long before they reach us?" he asked, already calculating wind speeds and potential escape routes. 2 hours, maybe less if this breeze holds steady." In his cabin, Emma and Sarah continued their afternoon lessons, blissfully unaware that danger approached across the water. Sarah was practicing her letters on a slate Willem had procured, while Emma worked on a piece of embroidery that old Pete had started teaching her. Their innocent occupation stood in stark contrast to the deadly game of cat and mouse beginning to unfold around them. "Girls," Blackwood called gently from the doorway, his voice carefully controlled to avoid causing panic. "We need to have a talk about ship safety." Emma looked up from her needlework, her intelligent eyes immediately detecting the tension in his posture. "There's another ship coming, isn't there? A dangerous one." Her perceptiveness continued to amaze him. Children often saw truth more clearly than adults, unencumbered by the rationalizations and denials that complicated mature thinking. There was no point in trying to deceive her about their situation. "A British naval vessel," he confirmed. "They're looking for pirates, and we certainly qualify." Sarah's face paled with remembered trauma, her small hands clutching the wooden doll Silas had carved for her. "Will they hurt us? Will they take us away?" "Not if I can help it," Blackwood replied with fierce conviction. "But you both need to understand that we might have to do some very fast sailing, and things could get frightening for a while." Emma set down her embroidery with the determined expression she wore when preparing to face difficult truths. "What can we do to help?" We don't want to be useless when everyone else is working to keep us safe. Her offer to contribute rather than simply hide revealed the character that had enabled her to survive on the rocky shore. These children possessed courage that many grown sailors lacked, a willingness to face danger rather than retreat into helpless terror. "Stay in the cabin unless someone comes to get you," Blackwood instructed. "If shooting starts, get under the bed and stay there until the noise stops. Can you do that?" Both girls nodded solemnly, understanding that their survival might depend on following instructions precisely. Sarah reached for Emma's hand, their sisterly bond providing mutual comfort in the face of approaching uncertainty. On deck, the crew prepared for potential combat with the efficient movements of men who had faced similar situations countless times. Cannons were loaded and secured, small arms distributed and checked, the ship's rigging adjusted for maximum speed and maneuverability. Yet something was different this time. Their usual anticipation of battle was tempered by protective concern for the innocents in their care. "We could try to outrun them," Miguel suggested, studying the approaching warship through a borrowed spyglass. "The Retribution is heavily armed, but slow. If we can reach the shoal waters near Devil's Island, she won't be able to follow." Tommy, checking the priming on his pistol, looked up with unusual boldness. "What if we tried something else? What if we talked to them instead of fighting?" The suggestion drew startled looks from the veteran pirates. Naval encounters traditionally ended in nightle or flight, never negotiation. But Tommy's youth allowed him to consider possibilities that experienced minds might dismiss automatically. "They'd demand our surrender," Willem pointed out. "And then we'd all dance at the end of a rope in Port Royal." "Maybe," Tommy replied thoughtfully. "But maybe not. We've got something different now. We've got children who need protection, and even naval officers have to respect that." Blackwood considered the radical suggestion while watching the distant warship grow larger on the horizon. His reputation had been built on never backing down from a fight, but that same reputation now threatened the safety of two innocent girls who trusted him completely. The red signal lantern that had once struck terror into merchant sailors now served a different purpose entirely. Instead of threatening surrender or destruction, Blackwood used it to send careful signals to the approaching HMS Retribution, requesting parley under a flag of truce rather than opening with cannon fire. "This is madness," Willem muttered, but he followed orders and raised the white flag alongside their traditional black one. The unusual combination created a visual paradox that would surely confuse the naval officers, a pirate ship requesting negotiation rather than preparing for battle. Captain Morrison of the Retribution proved willing to listen, though his response came in the form of warning shots fired across their bow rather than immediately closing for combat. The British warship maintained a cautious distance while signals flew between the vessels, establishing terms for a temporary ceasefire. "They want to know our intentions," Willem reported, reading the semaphore flags through his spyglass. "Morrison's giving us one chance to explain why we're not running or fighting." Blackwood had spent the morning crafting his strategy, weighing words with the same care he usually reserved for battle tactics. The truth was both his strongest weapon and his greatest vulnerability. He had rescued two orphaned children, and would do anything necessary to ensure their safety. "Signal back that we have civilian passengers requiring safe passage," he ordered. "Request permission to approach under truce to discuss humanitarian concerns." The response from the Retribution took several minutes, suggesting heated discussion among the British officers. When it came, the message was both cautious and curious. Permission granted for Captain Blackwood to board the naval vessel alone for negotiation, with both ships' guns to remain loaded, but untrained. Emma and Sarah watched from the cabin windows as preparations were made for their captain's departure. Their faces, pressed against the glass, showed concern beyond their years, understanding instinctively that their fate was being decided by forces beyond their control. "Will he come back?" Sarah whispered to her sister, her small voice carrying the fear of abandonment that had haunted her since their parents' death. "He promised to take care of us," Emma replied with fierce conviction. "Captain Blackwood keeps his promises." Her faith proved to be more than childhood optimism. As Blackwood prepared for the most important negotiation of his career, he found himself thinking not of personal survival, but of two small girls who depended on his ability to find solutions beyond violence. The journey between ships in a small boat felt longer than any battle he had ever fought. Captain Morrison waited on the Retribution's deck in full uniform, surrounded by Marines whose muskets remained conspicuously visible, but not directly threatening. The British officer was younger than Blackwood had expected, perhaps 40, with the bearing of someone who had earned his rank through competence rather than political connections. "Captain Blackwood," Morrison said formally, as the pirate climbed aboard. "Your reputation precedes you, though I confess I'm surprised by your current restraint." "Circumstances change," Blackwood replied carefully. "As do priorities." Morrison led him to the ship's wardroom, where charts and documents suggested careful planning for this encounter. The British had clearly been tracking the Crimson Revenge for some time, waiting for the right moment to force a confrontation. "You're wanted for piracy, murder, and crimes against merchant shipping spanning 2 decades. Morrison stated without preamble. "Yet you approach under a flag of truce, claiming humanitarian concerns." "Explain." Blackwood had prepared for this moment, but facing a representative of legitimate authority while pleading for mercy, felt alien after years of taking whatever he wanted through force. The change in his circumstances demanded a corresponding change in his methods. "I have 2 orphaned children aboard my vessel," he began. "Girls aged 8 and 10, survivors of a shipwreck. They require protection and safe passage to family or suitable guardians." Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly. "Pirates taking in orphans? Forgive my skepticism, but that seems remarkably out of character." "Perhaps it is," Blackwood admitted, "but character can change when circumstances demand it." The British captain studied him with the analytical gaze of someone trained to read men's intentions. Whatever he saw in Blackwood's face seemed to give him pause, suggesting that sincerity could sometimes penetrate even official skepticism. "These children," Morrison said carefully, "how did they come to be in your care?" Blackwood told the story simply and honestly. The Dolphin's guidance, the discovery of the girls near death, his crew's unexpected transformation into protectors rather than predators. He spoke without embellishment or dramatic flourishes, letting the facts carry their own weight. The monastery of San Rafael appeared like a vision of peace rising from the tropical coastline, its white stone walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. Founded by Spanish missionaries 2 centuries earlier, it had survived changes of colonial control by maintaining strict neutrality and providing sanctuary to anyone who sought it, regardless of nationality or past crimes. Captain Morrison had agreed to escort them to this neutral harbor, though his conditions were strict. Blackwood's crew would remain aboard the Crimson Revenge under British supervision, while the children's future was determined. The bronze sanctuary bell that crowned the monastery's tower had called countless souls to safety over the generations, and now it would decide whether Emma and Sarah could find the peaceful life their parents had intended for them. Father Miguel Santos emerged from the monastery gates as the ships anchored in the protected harbor. At 65, he carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had devoted his life to serving others without expectation of reward. His brown robes were simple and well-worn, but his eyes held the wisdom that came from decades of providing counsel to troubled souls.
"Captain Blackwood," the priest said in accented English, extending his hand in greeting rather than recoiling from the notorious pirate's reputation. "Captain Morrison has told me of your unusual circumstances. May I meet the children you have protected?" Emma and Sarah had dressed in their finest remaining clothes for this meeting, understanding instinctively that their future depended on making a good impression. Emma held Sarah's hand tightly as they were introduced to the priest, their young faces showing the mixture of hope and fear that defined their current existence. "Hello, Father," Emma said with the careful politeness her mother had taught her. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." Father Santos knelt to bring himself to their eye level, his gentle manner immediately putting them at ease. "You have been through terrible trials, little ones, but you are safe now, and that is what matters most." Sarah stepped closer to Blackwood, her small hand seeking his weathered one. "Will we have to leave the captain? He saved us when we were dying. He's been taking care of us."
The simple question cut to the heart of the complex situation they all faced. The monastery could provide education, safety, and preparation for respectable futures, but it would also mean separation from the man who had become their protector and father figure. The monastery has resources to care for children, Father Santos explained gently. We can provide education, teach you skills that will serve you well in life, help you find appropriate families when you're older. Emma looked up at Blackwood, her intelligent eyes searching his face for guidance. What do you think we should do, Captain? What would be best for us? The question forced him to confront the central conflict that had been growing since their rescue. His selfish desire to keep them close warred with his rational understanding that a pirate ship was no place for children to grow up. They deserved stability, education, and the chance to become respectable young women rather than outcasts living outside society's laws. "This is a good place," he said finally, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "Father Santos can give you things I cannot. Proper schooling, safety, a chance at normal lives." But Sarah's grip on his hand tightened, her young voice carrying desperate determination. "We don't want normal lives if they don't include you. You're our family now." Captain Morrison, who had been observing the interaction with professional interest, stepped forward with a suggestion that surprised everyone present. There might be another option. The Crown has been discussing amnesty programs for pirates willing to reform. Captain Blackwood's recent actions suggest he might be a suitable candidate. The possibility hung in the air like an answered prayer. Amnesty would mean an end to his life as an outlaw, the chance to become a legitimate sea captain, engaged in honest trade. It would also mean he could maintain his role as the girls' guardian while providing them with a respectable future. What would be required? Blackwood asked carefully, hardly daring to hope that such an outcome might be possible. Renunciation of piracy, compensation for past damages where possible, and a period of supervised service to demonstrate genuine reform, Morrison explained. The children's welfare would be monitored to ensure they receive proper care and education. Father Santos nodded approvingly. "The monastery could provide tutoring and religious instruction while they remain in your care. Many reformed men have found peace through serving others rather than themselves." Emma and Sarah exchanged glances that spoke of shared relief and growing excitement. The possibility of keeping their chosen family together while still receiving the stability they needed represented the best possible outcome of their desperate situation. That evening, alone in his cabin aboard the Crimson Revenge, Blackwood opened his personal logbook for the first time in months. The leather-bound journal had chronicled 20 years of raids, battles, and calculated violence, its pages filled with precise records of ships taken, treasure claimed, and enemies defeated. Tonight, he would write a different kind of entry. The decision before him required careful consideration of factors he had never weighed before: the long-term welfare of 2 children, the possibility of redemption after decades of sin, and the chance to transform his legacy from one of fear to one of protection. His weathered hands, which had wielded cutlass and pistol with deadly skill, now held a quill pen with surprising gentleness. "Today I was offered something I thought lost forever," he wrote in his careful script. "The possibility of honor." Captain Morrison speaks of amnesty, of a chance to serve rather than steal, to protect rather than plunder. "The price is everything I have been for 20 years. The reward is everything I might become." Through his cabin windows, he could see Emma and Sarah on the monastery beach, collecting shells under Father Santos' watchful supervision. Their laughter carried across the water, the sound of children at play, untainted by the violence that had defined his world for so long. They had adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that only the young possessed. But their frequent glances toward his ship revealed where their loyalties lay. Willem knocked softly before entering, his weathered face showing the concern of a friend rather than merely a subordinate. "The crew's been talking, Captain, about this amnesty business. They want to know what you're thinking. And what are you thinking?" Blackwood asked, setting down his pen to give his first mate his full attention. Willem settled into the chair across from the desk, the same seat where they had planned countless raids and divided uncounted treasures. I'm thinking that 20 years is a long time to live outside the law. I'm thinking that maybe there's something to be said for sleeping without one eye open, for walking into a port without checking over your shoulder. The admission surprised neither of them. Pirates often spoke of retirement, of the day when they would have enough wealth to disappear into respectability, but few ever reached that mythical shore. Most died violent deaths long before accumulating enough fortune to matter, while the successful ones found themselves unable to abandon the only life they knew. The men would follow you, Willem continued. Most of them, anyway. You've never led us wrong before, and there's something to be said for trying a different path. Blackwood returned to his writing, recording thoughts and observations that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. I have watched these children transform not just my own heart, but the hearts of men I thought incapable of tenderness. If such change is possible, perhaps any transformation is possible. The Dolphin that had guided them to the girls still visited the ship occasionally, its sleek form visible in the moonlight as it swam around their anchored vessel. The creature's presence had become a source of comfort and mystery, a reminder that forces beyond human understanding sometimes shaped mortal destinies. Young Tommy appeared at the cabin door, his usual hesitancy replaced by determined purpose. Captain, I wanted to say something about the amnesty, about what it might mean for all of us. Fuse your mind, Blackwood encouraged, curious to hear the youngest crew member's perspective. My father was a merchant sailor before he died, Tommy said quietly. Honest work, respected work. He used to tell me that a man's worth wasn't measured by what he took from the world, but by what he gave to it. Maybe this is our chance to give something back. The words resonated with painful clarity. Blackwood's own father had been a fisherman, an honest man who had died trying to feed his family during a harsh winter. The path that had led from that poor fishing village to pirate captaincy seemed clear in retrospect, but it had not been inevitable. Different choices might have led to a different life entirely. I have decided, Blackwood announced, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect for 2 decades. We will accept Morrison's offer. We will seek amnesty, redemption, and the chance to serve rather than steal. Willem nodded slowly, understanding that this decision would change everything about their existence. The girls will be pleased. They've been worried about leaving you behind. They won't have to, Blackwood replied, closing his logbook with finality. We're going to become the kind of men who deserve their trust. The ceremony took place at dawn, witnessed by Father Santos, Captain Morrison, and the entire crew of the Crimson Revenge. The old black flag with its skull and crossbones was lowered for the final time, folded with military precision, and stored away as a relic of their former lives. In its place rose a new banner, white canvas bearing the image of a dolphin leaping over an anchor, painted by Emma and Sarah with careful devotion to symbolize guidance and protection. I hereby christen this vessel, the Guardian's Promise, Blackwood announced, his voice carrying across the calm harbor waters. May she serve to protect the innocent rather than prey upon them. The crew stood at attention during the rechristening, their faces showing a mixture of solemnity and hope. These hardened men, who had spent years living outside society's laws, were voluntarily submitting themselves to a new code based on service rather than selfishness. The transformation was as much spiritual as practical, representing a fundamental change in how they understood their purpose. Emma and Sarah, dressed in simple white dresses provided by the monastery, watched from the quarterdeck as their new family formally abandoned their criminal past. The girls had participated in designing the new flag, their innocent artwork replacing the symbols of death and destruction with images of life and hope. Captain Morrison stepped forward to deliver the official proclamation that had been prepared by colonial authorities. By order of His Majesty's government, Captain Blackwood and crew are hereby granted conditional amnesty in recognition of their humanitarian service and commitment to lawful commerce. This pardon is contingent upon continued good conduct and regular reporting to designated authorities. The legal language felt strange after years of operating outside any law except their own, but it represented freedom from the constant fear of capture and execution that had shadowed their every action. Willem accepted the official documents with hands that trembled slightly, understanding that they now possessed something more valuable than any treasure: legitimate status in civilized society. Old Pete had spent the morning converting the ship's weapon stores into merchant cargo holds, transforming spaces designed for cannonballs and gunpowder into areas suitable for legitimate trade goods. The changes were symbolic as well as practical, representing their commitment to earning wealth through honest commerce rather than violent theft. "What will we trade?" Tommy asked, his young mind already embracing the possibilities that legitimate business offered. "Whatever the eyes need," Blackwood replied, studying charts that showed trade routes instead of potential raid targets. "Food, tools, medicines, books, things that improve people's lives rather than ending." Father Santos approached with a leather satchel containing educational materials for the girls. "These are primers in mathematics, literature, and natural philosophy. The children are remarkably intelligent and will benefit from structured learning as they travel with you." The priest's approval meant more to Blackwood than any treasure he had ever claimed. Here was a man devoted to serving God and helping others, and he believed the former pirate captain capable of redemption and responsible guardianship. That faith would serve as a cornerstone for their new life. Emma had been working on a piece of embroidery during the ceremony, her small fingers creating a design that depicted their ship sailing toward a sunrise. "It's for your cabin," she explained, presenting the finished work to Blackwood. "So you remember that every day is a new beginning." The simple gift carried more meaning than Alara presents from wealthy admirers. This child, who had lost everything to violence and circumstance, was offering him hope and encouragement as they embarked on their shared journey toward respectability. Her faith in his ability to change inspired him to become worthy of such trust. Sarah had been practicing her letters, and she presented him with a carefully written note that read, "Thank you for saving us and becoming our pap. We promise to be good daughters and help you be a good merchant captain." The word papa struck him like a physical blow, representing acceptance and love beyond anything he had thought possible. These children were not merely passengers under his protection, they were choosing him as their father, trusting him to guide them toward productive and meaningful lives. Miguel, who had served as the ship's gunner throughout their pirate years, approached with a proposal that surprised everyone. "Captain, I've been thinking about what we might trade. My grandmother in Caracas, she knew about medicinal plants, herbs that can heal sickness. Maybe we could learn such things, bring healing instead of harm." The suggestion that their most destructive crew member wanted to focus on healing represented the depth of transformation occurring throughout the ship. Men who had spent years perfecting the art of violence were voluntarily choosing to learn the arts of peace. The threatening message arrived 3 weeks after their transformation, delivered by a scarred man who slipped away from the Port Royal docks before anyone could question him properly. The parchment bore dark stains that could only be blood, and the crude handwriting carried promises of violence that made Blackwood's stomach clench with familiar dread. "Captain Redbeard sends his regards," Willem read aloud, his Dutch accent making the threatening words sound even more ominous. "Says you've betrayed the Brotherhood and made yourself an enemy of every honest pirate in the Caribbean. Says the children you protect make convenient targets for teaching lessons about loyalty." The letter went on to detail specific threats against Emma and Sarah, describing their daily routines with accuracy that suggested they had been watched for days. Someone had observed the girls during their morning lessons on deck, had noted their favorite spots for reading, had even described the wooden dolls that Silas had carved for them. Blackwood crumpled the message in his fist, his face darkening with anger that his crew had not seen since their pirate days. "Double the watch. No one approaches this ship without proper identification. The girls don't leave the cabin without armed escort." Emma, who had been practicing her penmanship nearby, looked up from her slate with concern that seemed far too mature for her 10 years. "Someone wants to hurt us because you decided to become good." The simple question cut to the heart of their dilemma. By choosing redemption, Blackwood had indeed made enemies of his former associates, who viewed his transformation as betrayal and weakness. Pirates lived by codes that demanded loyalty to criminal enterprise above all other considerations, and abandoning that life was seen as the ultimate treachery. Some people don't like it when others change for the better, he explained carefully, not wanting to frighten her while ensuring she understood the seriousness of their situation. They think everyone should stay the same as they've always been. Sarah emerged from the cabin where she had been napping, her small face bright with innocent curiosity. Are we going to have another adventure? Her ability to view danger as adventure rather than threat spoke to the resilience that had enabled her to survive on the rocky shore. Children possessed an optimism that adults often lost, a faith that everything would work out well despite evidence to the contrary. Old Pete appeared at Blackwood's elbow, his medical bag replaced by a pistol and cutlass that he wore with the comfortable familiarity of someone returning to old habits. The crew's asking about our response, Captain. Some of the lads are thinking we should strike first rather than wait for Redbeard to make his move. The suggestion appealed to Blackwood's tactical instincts, but it also represented a potential return to the violent solutions they had sworn to abandon. Protecting the children might require fighting, but starting a war would make them targets rather than deterrents. We prepare for defense, he decided, but we don't initiate violence unless they force our hand. Tommy had been listening from his position at the ship's wheel, his young face showing the conflict between his newfound peaceful principles and his protective instincts toward the girls. Maybe we could find help. Captain Morrison seemed like a fair man. The Royal Navy doesn't like pirates threatening civilians. The suggestion had merit, though it meant admitting they could not handle the threat alone. Seeking official protection would further cement their transformation from outlaws to law-abiding citizens, but it would also demonstrate that they had truly changed sides in the eternal conflict between order and chaos. Miguel appeared from below deck, with news that made their situation even more complicated. 3 ships have been asking questions in Port Royal about our whereabouts. Not naval vessels, Captain. Pirates flying black flags, working together in ways that ain't natural for such independent types. The intelligence suggested that Redbeard had organized a coordinated response to their betrayal, gathering multiple crews for what appeared to be a planned assault. Such cooperation among pirates was rare, and indicated the seriousness with which their former associates viewed the threat of a successful transformation. Emma had returned to her writing, but now she was composing something different from her usual practice letters. "I'm writing to Captain Morrison," she announced, with determined efficiency. "If bad pirates want to hurt us for being good, then good Navy captains should want to help us stay safe." Her logic was unassailable, and her willingness to take action rather than simply worry impressed everyone who heard her proposal. This child, who had survived shipwreck and near death, was now taking initiative to protect her chosen family through diplomatic rather than violent means. "That's an excellent idea," Blackwood approved, though he knew that official help might come too late if Redbeard moved quickly. The attack came at dawn, 3 ships emerging from the morning mist, like vengeful spirits seeking retribution for betrayal. Redbeard's flagship, the Devil's Wrath, led the assault with 2 smaller vessels flanking her in a formation designed to prevent escape. But they had not counted on facing men who were fighting to protect children rather than merely defending treasure. "Battle stations," Blackwood commanded, his voice carrying the calm authority that had served him through countless engagements. "Remember, we're not pirates anymore. We're guardians." Emma and Sarah had already been moved to the ship's most protected area, a small chamber below the waterline that Silas had reinforced with extra timber. Each girl wore a simple carved dolphin pendant that the crew had crafted as protective amulets, tangible symbols of their unbreakable bond with their chosen father. "Stay brave," Emma whispered to her younger sister, holding her close as the first cannon shots thundered across the water. "Papa will protect us. He always keeps his promises." Sarah clutched her wooden doll tightly, her young mind finding comfort in the familiar toy that represented safety and love. Will the bad pirates go away when they see how much Papa loves? The innocence of her question would have been heartbreaking under other circumstances, but now it served as inspiration for men preparing to risk everything for the children's safety. They were no longer fighting for personal glory or material gain, but for the preservation of something precious and irreplaceable. Willem had positioned their ship to take advantage of shallow waters where their intimate knowledge of local currents gave them tactical superiority. The attacking vessels, unfamiliar with these particular reefs, would have to approach carefully or risk running aground on hidden coral formations. "They're trying to box us in," Miguel observed, his experienced eye reading the enemy's intentions. "Force us into deep water where their superior numbers matter most." But Blackwood had learned new tactics during their transformation, strategies based on protection rather than aggression. Instead of charging into battle with guns blazing, he maneuvered. The Guardians promised to keep maximum distance while using their knowledge of local waters to maintain defensive advantages. Old Pete had abandoned his medical role temporarily, manning one of their few remaining cannons with the skill that had made him legendary during their pirate years. But even his targeting focused on disabling rather than destroying, aiming for rigging and steering rather than hull damage that would kill enemy sailors. "Warning shot across Redbeard's bow," Blackwood ordered. "Let him know we're prepared to fight, but still hoping to avoid unnecessary bloodshed." The response came in the form of a devastating broadside that splintered their port rail and sent wooden fragments flying across the deck. Redbeard was clearly not interested in negotiation or mercy, viewing their transformation as weakness to be exploited, rather than strength to be respected. Tommy, now serving as the ship's navigator, called out positioning information that allowed them to thread between reef formations that would trap larger vessels. His youth and sharp eyes made him invaluable for reading the subtle watercolor changes that indicated safe passage versus hidden dangers. "2 points to starboard," he shouted over the din of battle. "There's a channel that will let us turn the tables on." The maneuver he suggested was brilliant in its simplicity. By leading the attacking ships into waters where only one could follow at a time, they could face their enemies sequentially, rather than simultaneously. It was the kind of tactical thinking that their merchant training had emphasized over brute force approaches. Silas emerged from below deck with a report that changed everything. "Captain, I've been working on something special. Remember how we used to signal other ships? I've rigged our signal lanterns to send a message that should bring help if anyone friendly is watching." The carpenter had modified their communication system to broadcast a distress call using naval codes, rather than pirate signals. If Captain Morrison or any other Royal Navy vessel was within range, they would understand that the Guardian's promise was under attack, and requesting assistance. As the battle intensified, the crew fought with a coordination and purpose they had never achieved during their criminal years. Each man understood that they were protecting more than their own lives. They were defending the future of 2 innocent children who represented hope for redemption in an often dark world. Emma's voice could be heard from their protected compartment, singing a lullaby to comfort her frightened sister. The sound of children's voices rising above the cannon fire served as a constant reminder of what they were fighting for, transforming ordinary sailors into heroes willing to sacrifice everything for love. 10 years had passed since that desperate battle in the reef-protected waters, and the bronze memorial plaque mounted near Port Royal's harbor told the story in words that would endure long after those who lived it had passed into legend. In commemoration of Captain Blackwood and the crew of the Guardian's promise, who proved that the human heart can transform even the darkest past into light for future generations. Emma, now 20 years old, stood reading the inscription with the poise and grace of a young woman who had been raised with love, education, and unwavering support. Beside her, 18-year-old Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in the world or the devotion of her chosen family. "Do you remember being afraid?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying only curiosity rather than trauma, as she recalled their childhood ordeal. "I remember being rescued," Emma replied, her hand resting affectionately on the weathered shoulder of the man who had shaped their lives. "I remember Papa carrying us to safety and promising we would always be protected." Captain Blackwood, now 77, and bearing the accumulated dignity of a life transformed, smiled as he watched his daughters examine the memorial. His hair had gone completely white, and his hands showed the tremor of advanced age, but his eyes still held the clarity and purpose that had guided them through their remarkable journey. The Guardian's promise rocked gently at anchor nearby, her hull showing the honest wear of a decade spent in legitimate trade rather than violent conquest. She had carried medicine to plague-stricken islands, delivered food to communities devastated by hurricanes, and transported families seeking new lives in distant ports. Her hold had never again carried stolen treasure, only goods purchased fairly and delivered with a reliability that had earned them respect throughout the Caribbean. Willem approached from the docks, his own advancing years evident in his careful gait, but his spirit undimmed by time. The harbour master says there's a merchant vessel from Boston looking for reliable transport to the Windward Islands, family with young children, wanting safe passage. The old first mate's words carried special meaning for their crew. Over the years, they had specialized in protecting families during ocean travel, their reputation for safety and care drawing passengers who valued security over speed or luxury. Word had spread that the Guardian's promise was the safest ship in Caribbean waters for those traveling with children. "We'll take them," Blackwood decided without hesitation. Children deserve to travel without fear. Old Pete, now past 80 but still serving as ship's surgeon and cook, emerged from the galley with news that brought smiles to every face. The new passengers include twin girls, about 6 years old, reminded me of our own young ladies when they first came aboard. The parallel was not lost on anyone present. Their ship had become a sanctuary for families, a place where children could experience the wonder of sea travel without the dangers that historically made ocean voyages perilous for the innocent and vulnerable. Tommy, now the ship's captain under Blackwood's guidance, had grown into a leader whose gentle authority inspired confidence rather than fear. At 28, he commanded the vessel with competence earned through years of learning from masters of seamanship and human nature. "The Dolphin's back," he reported, pointing toward the harbor entrance, where a familiar gray form could be seen leaping in the evening light. "Same one, I'd swear to it. Still watching over us after all these years." The creature that had guided them to their transformation continued to appear during significant moments, as if monitoring their progress and ensuring they remained true to their reformed purpose. Its presence had become a blessing rather than a mystery, a reminder that some forces in the universe supported goodness over evil. Emma had become a teacher, her natural intelligence and broad education making her invaluable for instructing the children of passengers during long voyages. Sarah had developed into a gifted artist, her paintings of sea life and island landscapes bringing beauty to their travels while documenting the wonders they encountered. "What do you think would have happened if we had never found you?" Sarah asked, settling beside her adoptive father on a wooden bench that overlooked the harbor. Blackwood considered the question with the wisdom that came from years of reflection on the mysterious workings of Providence. "I think we would have continued being what we were until the sea or the gallows claimed us. You saved us as much as we saved you." As the sun set over the Caribbean waters that had witnessed their transformation, the family that chance and choice had created sat together in the contentment that comes from lives well lived and purposes fulfilled. They had learned that redemption was always possible, that love could triumph over violence, and that the greatest treasures were not gold or silver, but the bonds forged between hearts, willing to protect and cherish one another.